It feels a bit like a parallel universe where we've got a Conservative government with, really high taxes, which we normally associate with the Labour Party, and we've got the Labour Party coming on this morning arguing for our military, which is usually the remit of the Conservative Party. Quite surprising to hear you pushing this morning.
Well, my argument today is it's time to reboot Britain's defence plans. 25 other NATO nations have already done this since the Ukraine invasion. We haven't, and part of that plan has got to be to boost military production so that we can sustain our support for Ukraine for the long term, and we can rearm and rebuild our own stocks for the British forces.
John, you've got a big speech on this tonight. Who are you addressing?
I'm addressing military figures, commentators, people who are concerned about the security of our country and recognise, as I do, that this is long term. Ukraine's been fighting the Russians for 9 years, not one, and recognise that the next government will inherit Ukraine, the conflict, it'll inherit the Russian aggression. And I want to say very clearly today that there may be a change of government at the next election, but there will be no change in Britain's resolve to confront Russian threats, to pursue Putin for his war crimes, and also to stand for the long term in support of Ukraine.
Over the long term, John, I've heard so many forces, people talking about how their branch of the services has been run down, whether it's the Royal Navy, Royal Air Force, whether it's been the Army. This has been going on for a long, long time. Does that make us more vulnerable to attack? Should we go to a war footing? Should we be on a constant war footing? Would we be able to? And will Labour now be the party for the armed forces?
Well, Labour will always do what's required and spend what's required to defend the country. We did when we were last in government, and in 2010 when we left government, Britain was spending 2.5% of our GDP budget on defence. That's not been matched anything like since. And we had the Defence Secretary himself stand up in the House of Commons and tell me last week that after 13 years of the Conservatives, he admitted they had hollowed out and they had underfunded our forces. So it is time to reboot our defence plans. The Chancellor knows and has said he has to spend more on defence in the spring budget, so that'll be the first test. The second test, of course, is it's not just how much you spend, but how well you spend it. And the MOD has wasted at least £5 billion on bad procurement decisions in the last 4 years alone. So we need a plan to reform defence procurement, but also to boost production so that we can keep up our support of Ukraine and make sure our armed forces have the equipment that they need to face any future conflict.
You talk about Labour having 2.5% of GDP being spent on military, on defence when you were in power. Is that the figure that you would like to see then if you did get into office next year? Because, of course, the Defence Secretary, Ben Wallace, has been long campaigning for 3%, and he was actually guaranteed that for the end of the decade. But obviously circumstances have changed, partly because of the situation with the war in Ukraine and the impact that has had on energy costs to the government.
Yeah, I think people must judge ministers on their actions, not the words, and that 3% promise proved to be a pitch for Liz Truss to win the Tory leadership campaign. There was no new money for defence in the mini budget. There was no new money for defence in the autumn statement.
So what's your promise?
What's required to spend on what's required on defence depends on the threats we face, and in opposition you simply don't have access to the classified information that make those judgments. So I've said that we will launch and conduct within the first year of a Labour government a full defence and security review, and we'll be able to make the big decisions for a Labour government based on that.